3, 2. Welcome once again to another edition of Quoth, Raven, Lewis, Brett Raven Weekend Movie Review. This is February 18th, 2022, and we are discussing Max Fleischer Studios' Adventures of Superman from the 1941-42 year, the animated shorts. Last week we did part 1. There is a link to that video in the description below on YouTube. So if you missed that, you can always go back and check that out. But we're going to start with episode 10. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, John Figaro Norris.
Good evening, everybody.
And it's been kind of a crazy week. We're both kind of, it's been tiresome. Yeah. So we're going to try and keep you guys entertained as well as ourselves. So let's go ahead and get started with episode 10, Japateurs. I'll let you go ahead and read, John.
Okay. Episode Japateurs, directed by Seymour Neidl, story by Bill Turner and Carl Meyer, based on, of course, Superman by Siegel and Schuster, produced by Sam Buchwald, starring Bud Collyer, Joan Alexander, Julian Noah, and Jack Mercer. Production company Famous Studios, distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release date September 18th, 1942. Running time of 9 minutes.
Okay, now before we get to the plot, this is the point where, for those of you who don't remember, we mentioned this last week. It says production company Famous Studios instead of Max Fleischer Studios because Max Fleischer was fired off the production, and then the company was absorbed into Famous Studios. It is still the same people, but the Fleischer brothers are no longer involved in the production. Okay, we can go on with the plot.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit more about that later on if we want to, but so the story begins with a shot of the front page of the Daily Planet. The headline reads, "World's largest bombing plane finally completed." The man reading the newspaper is Japanese. He stands up and looks at a picture of the Statue of Liberty in his office and pushes a button on his desk, and the picture changes into one of the Japanese flag. He bows to it and jams his glowing cigarette into the news headline. Later, the Japanese man and some acquaintances knock a guard out as the plane is being loaded for a test run. Clark Kent and Lois Lane are taking a tour of the new bombing plane for the Planet. While everyone is told to get off, Lois stays behind and hides in a locker on board the plane because, of course, she does. She's Lois Lane. She's got a story.
Yes.
The plane takes off. We see that there are other stowaways aboard. Hidden in what looks like bombs are the Japanese men. The spies tie and gag the pilots and hijack the plane. Meanwhile, Lois emerges from her hiding place and moves over to the cockpit. As she's about to open the door, she notices that the Japanese spies have hijacked the plane. She sneaks into the room and calls for help on the radio, but the spies seize her. In response to her calls for help, fighter planes are sent to stop the hijackers. In response, the hijackers deploy a bomb which stops the fighters from taking off. Clark Kent goes into an elevator and changes into Superman as it goes up to the roof. He takes off after the bomber plane. Superman enters the plane to stop the hijackers, but one of them has Lois tied up and is ready to drop her out of the plane through the bomb hatch. Superman jumps out of the plane and comes back in through the bomb hatch to save Lois as she's being dropped. He unties her and starts fighting the hijackers. One of them breaks the plane's controls and the plane starts falling toward the city. Superman takes Lois out of the plane and places her on the ground, then flies back up and catches the plane, bringing it to a safe landing right in the middle of the street.
My thoughts, personally. There's lots and lots of logic flaws in the story. For one thing, the bomber plane takes off way too soon. For crying out loud, Clark has barely stepped off of the staircase that's exiting. While he's exiting the plane, he just got to the ground and it's pulling away already. It doesn't work like that, folks. The way the Japanese characters are designed is in vogue with the time period in which this film was made. But I suspect in today's overly PC world, there would be outrage over it. And if you don't know what the outrage with the exclamation part is, it's like the Frank Cho outrage. I admit I don't care for the designs either, but I never liked them because they make the characters look goofy and silly, and it takes away from their believability as a threat. But I never looked at it as. I mean, certainly it's racist, but when I was younger, when I first saw these as a kid, I didn't think of it as that. I just thought they looked, just dumb and poorly designed. I also didn't care for the way he saved the plane. He lands it in the middle of a street where the wings would, no matter what happens, would crash into the buildings, and cause damage. But okay, But for those of you who have seen Brandon Routh's Superman Returns film where he saves the plane, this is the story where they got that idea from. That is exactly where that came from. So if you didn't like it there, you won't like it here.
Yeah.
What else do you have to add to this?
Not much. I agree with everything you said, and of course. And I agree about the depiction of the Japanese, although I didn't really have a problem with their designs here. There's an episode that coming up that we're going to talk about where they really...
It gets worse as we go.
Yes.
We're going to get into that. This episode and 3 or 4 episodes that we're going to get into as we discuss this, they get more and more into this World War II propaganda type stuff. And
it's like I get that it was topical at the time, but they don't hold up well.
No, it's not that they don't hold up well. It wouldn't have held up even in the times, I don't think, other than the way the government pushed things. Because this is not something that they did of their own volition. This is something that they were basically requested to do by the government in Hollywood in those times, was to do stuff like that. So, they did the best they could with what they were asked to do. Okay, our next episode is Showdown. And this is directed by Isidore Sparber, story by Jay Morton, based on Superman by Siegel and Schuster, produced by Sam Buchwald, starring Bud Collyer, Jonah Alexander, and Julia Noah. A production company, Famous Studios, distributed by Paramount Pictures, release date October 16th of 1942 with a running time of 9 minutes. And the plot is the story starts off with a figure dressed as Superman terrorizing Metropolis with various robberies. In reality, he's actually a small-time crook who is working for a big-time gangster known as the Boss, who insults him at any chance and every opportunity he gets. Every paper in town, however, thinks that it's the real Superman, and they run the story that Superman has gone bad, but Lois Lane doesn't believe it to be true. As she and Clark Kent read the story at the Daily Planet, now I don't remember if there was an actual Daily Planet article that they said he'd gone bad, or they're reading other papers. But anyway, an office boy informs them that their editor, Perry White, wants them to cover the opera and gives them 2 tickets. So they go to the opera, where the Superman imposter sneaks from booth to booth, swiping people's jewelry without them noticing. When one woman cries out in alarm because she notices her necklace has been taken off her, Lois leaves her seat and walks out into the hallway and confronts the imposter. After a brief struggle, she rips the S patch off the imposter's chest and he runs away. But not having seen his face in the dark hallway, Lois is convinced that maybe Superman really has been responsible for all the crimes. As Lois calls the police, Clark exits the booth to follow after the imposter. Cracking the door slightly open on the roof, he notices the imposter looking over the edge, and he says, "My double is in for some trouble." Cute little line of dialogue there. Seeing that the police cars have gathered on the street below, the imposter heads back towards the door into the stairwell, where, of course, he is confronted by the real Superman. The imposter takes out his gun and fires several rounds at Superman to no avail. Of course,
and then he throws the gun at Superman as if that'll do any good.
Well, everybody does that once they run out. That's kind of a common thing.
Yep.
In fact, I think this is one of the first times that was done. And then,
I think so.
And when George Reeves' Superman, the live-action Superman, came in, that was a common thing that they used to do, and I think that's where it came from. But anyway, Superman, of course, grabs a hold of him, and the imposter claims that boss made him do it. Without noticing, however, the imposter has reached the edge of the rooftop, and he falls over the edge. Superman then swoops down to save him just in time. In the glow of the searchlights, Lois and the police realize that the real Superman is not the criminal. Hoping for a lighter punishment, the imposter agrees to take Superman to his boss. So they arrive at the boss's hideout, and Superman goes inside while the imposter waits outside. And he goes into the room, and without saying a thing, he stands in front of the boss's desk. After several moments, when he doesn't hand over any of the jewels, doesn't speak, doesn't do anything, the boss grabs a golf club and tries to hit him with it, and it doesn't do anything. And he's like, what's going on? Then he raises the lamp to hit him with the lamp, and he sees Superman's face, which prompts him to freak out. And he's like, uh-oh. He goes and presses a hidden button, opens a trapdoor, and sends Superman falling into a pit underneath. After the trapdoor closes, the boss and the imposter Superman put the desk over the door and then run to go hide and try to escape. Superman, of course, breaks out of the pit and opens the vault. He tears out electrified bars, only to find that the two have used a welding torch to cut a hole in the wall of the vault. Damn, that was fast. But they did it and escape. And who keeps a welding torch in their vault so that they can escape from the inside? But they did. Anyway, a police car is headed around the bend trying to get to the hideout, unaware that the criminals are coming at them from the other side in their car trying to escape Superman. But Superman, just in time, flies down and steps in between the two vehicles and stops them from crashing into each other. And then he grabs the criminals by their collars. Upset at getting caught, the imposter tells his boss, "Next time you play Superman." Superman then leaves the two criminals for the police to handle. We cut back to the Daily Planet next, where Clark is dozing off at his chair when Lois returns from the crime scene to start work writing her story. Clark tells her that he was dreaming that he was Superman. Lois responds by saying, "Oh, a fine Superman you'd make." And Clark replies, "Well, I can dream, can't I?" And I thought that was relatively well-written episode, one of the better episodes in this half
Yep.
of the year,
Yep.
of the set of stories. It's probably the best one done under the Famous Studios brand, I
Mm-hmm.
think. It's either this one or the Underground World, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The only thing I really didn't like for this episode was the new intro. Faster than a streak of lightning, more powerful than the pounding surf. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I just did not like that. But here's a quick scene of where the imposter is like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. But it's nice animation. But at the same time, it's funny because at this time they're still only using 2 or 3 guys to animate these shorts. Today, if they did them, they'd still have like 40 people doing it.
Well, it's 2 or 3 credited guys, but
That's true. It's still more, yeah. That's true. Okay, our next episode is called The 11th Hour, and this is another one of those World War II propaganda episodes. But let's get into it.
yes. So directed by Dan Gordon, story by Carl Meyer and Bill Turner, produced by Sam Bookwald, Dan Gordon, Seymour Nightel, and Isidore Sparber. Regular voice cast. So the plot. While Clark Kent and Lois Lane are kept under house arrest as prisoners of war in Japan, Superman becomes a saboteur. Now, when's the last time you heard that?
Yeah.
In the Japanese city of Yokohama, the 11th hour strikes and a ship is turned over. Superman escapes searchlights while sirens go off and goes through a window, putting a barred grill back in place. Lois asks if Clark is awake, to which he asks who could sleep through a racket like this. Lois says the racket has been happening every night since they have been interned. Clark says it may be sabotage, which Lois also hopes. She wonders if Superman is responsible. A guard tells them to stop talking. A Japanese official says the sabotage must stop at once. As the 11th hour strikes, Clark looks at his watch and leaves the window, returning as Superman. He leaves the room by removing the grill and drags the ship over into the sea. Sabotage happens every night at the 11th hour, and the official again says the sabotage still must be stopped. Lois sees Superman as he leaps between buildings. She says outside Clark's room that it is Superman. She just saw him, and the Japanese have a, quote, swell chance of catching him. However, a guard covers her mouth from behind and drags her out. Notices are put up saying, "Warning, Superman. One more act of sabotage and the American girl reporter will be executed at once." Not woman, but girl. And you'd think that you would execute the male reporter first, but it's like, oh, they forgot that he was their prisoner as well. So, anyway, Superman sends another ship into the sea, but is buried under steel girders in the process. Lois is taken out for execution with her hands tied behind her and blindfolded. What? They didn't even give her a cigarette?
You can tell how snarky I am when I'm reviewing this one.
As Superman digs himself out, he sees the notice and is fired on, but leaps away. Miraculously, arrives just in time and shields Lois just as the bullets are fired, because he's Superman, of course he does, and leaps away with her. Cut to a ship landing in America. Lois is interviewed. She is asked by a reporter if Clark got away, but says he is still over there, but Superman promised to look after him. Cut back to Japan as the 11th hour strikes in Japan. There's another explosion. It's like,
yeah, we all know what's going on.
And my first thought literally was, what the heck is going on here?
Yes, this is easily the worst episode, the worst film of the lot. There's no explanation of how or why Clark and Lois were ever over in Japan in the first place. There's no way that the Japanese don't realize that Clark is Superman and expose him because, I mean, come on. It's like, well, we'll just, we forgot that we had a male prisoner. We just don't, the notion of him being left behind and that Superman went back to look after him is preposterous. Now, if he had said he got Clark out on another ship, but that he was injured and he won't be back in America for a while, maybe we could buy that. And then he could still go back and play Saboteur without Lois or anybody else worrying about it. But basically, this episode was just World War II propaganda nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And it was easily we usually rank each one of these. We didn't do, we did it all as a whole lot. But if we were to go these as 5-star per episode, this would get maybe a 1 star. That's how bad this one was. The only thing that's good about it is the animated process. The animation is nice on it, but the story is just drivel, unfortunately.
Yes, and if you want to talk about a negative stereotypical image of the Japanese, this episode has them.
Oh yes, there's that too. And then not just the looks, but just the way they behave in general.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what it's what is requested of them. Again, we do need to emphasize this because there was a lot of consternation, and I think this is part of why Fleischer Studios was fired. The Fleischer brothers were fired. Was because they didn't necessarily believe in the anti-Japanese sentiment that was prominent in the country at the time. And they were asked to do that right away in that second half when Famous Studios took over. And if you'll notice, this is one of those episodes that's like 4 or 5 producers, and I think they were kind of, nobody really wanted it, and they were just hot potatoing it back and forth. So, it is what it is. Okay, next episode. Is it my turn or yours to read?
I think it's yours.
Okay. Episode 13, Destruction Incorporated, directed by Isidore Sparber, with story by Jay Morton. Produced by, again, 4 people, Sam Buchwald, Dan Gordon, Seymour Nightel, and Isidore Sparber. Same cast, same production company, same distributor. This came out on Christmas Day of 1942 with a running time of 9 minutes. The plot: one night in Metropolis, the elderly night watchman from the Metropolis Munitions Works is found dead in a swamp. Or actually, he's not found dead. We see his body in the swamp as the people who killed him dumped his body. When the news of the incident reaches the city the next morning, Lois and Clark both decide to grab the story for themselves. And they're working opposite each other instead of together. Clark talks to Lois, not realizing that she has already left, and that he is talking to a bus driver named Lewis. Hi, guys. I got angry because, you didn't get my name right. That stupid reporter. Meanwhile, Lois goes undercover at the plant after meeting with the plant supervisor in the personnel building, and she meets the new night guard, who's a kindly white-haired old man leaving the personnel management office. Posing as a factory worker, Lois overhears the foreman telling 2 of the workers that Mr. Jones, one of the supervisors, wants them in his office upstairs at 12 noon. During break time, the workers head up to Mr. Jones's office. Now, for whatever reason, Lois seems suspicious of this. There's no real reason for her to be, but she goes up to the office where she overhears Mr. Jones's plan to blow up the factory as they switch to the factory's night time shift and turn the lights on that have been rigged to cause an explosion. It is also revealed that the workers that went up to the office are the ones who killed the night watchman and dumped his body in the swamp to cover their tracks. Just then, Mr. Jones sees Lois's shadow outside the office window and opens the blinds, causing Lois to realize that she's been seen. She flees, and Mr. Jones sends the workers to catch her. She manages to get away from workers for temporarily across window ledges and beams, but eventually she's caught by the foreman. She is gagged and loaded inside a test torpedo with another case of dynamite. And my gosh, that must be either a very big torpedo or Lois is like with the toothpick. I just thought that was, I mean, it's funny because we see this sort of thing where characters are loaded into torpedoes in cartoons all the time. It's just not logical when you stop and think about it, but okay. Anyway, the night guard enters the room, the new night guard, and he tries to rush to help Lois after witnessing what's happening, but the foreman stops the night guard by dropping several tons of scrap metal upon him, seemingly killing him. So they send the torpedo with Lois inside to the testing range, and that torpedo is set to be fired at a dummy ship. Of course, this will explode the dummy ship, and Lois will be, bits and pieces. Back inside the factory, however, the night guard is struggling to free himself from the rubble. Of course, that's because the night guard is revealed to be Clark, and he gets out of the rubble, and he's now going to change himself into Superman and fly off to the test field. He gets there just as the test torpedo is fired, and he has to rush out to the testing range and save Lois before a torpedo explodes. He frees Lois, who tells him that Mr. Jones is about to blow up the plant. Realizing that they've been discovered, however, Mr. Jones orders the foreman to throw the night guard switch now, but Superman gets there and stops the foreman and the workers from throwing it fully before beating them down. Just when Mr. Jones thinks his plans are ruined, however, Jones spots a truck loaded with dynamite. He gets in the truck and steers it toward the factory on a collision course and jumps out before the impact. Lois warns Superman about the truck, and of course, Superman stops it and sends the truck over a cliff and saves the factory. The story concludes with Mr. Jones, the foreman, and the workers being arrested for their crimes, and Lois revealing that she knew that Clark was the night guard all along. Sure you did. Now, it may have been meant as subtle irony that Lois was able to see through this disguise easily, but still can't figure out that Clark is Superman also. The fact that this is the episode directly following the 11th hour episode should make it painfully obvious that she should be able to figure it out as well. But that is what it is.
Yep.
It's not a horrible episode compared to Japator and 11th Hour, but again, it still has that whole militaristic World War II theme to it that really they could have done something else with this and made it just as exciting a story without that element in it, and it probably would have turned out better as a result.
Yep. I agree.
Now we get to a good episode.
The Mummy Strikes. Directed by Isidore Sparber, story by Jay Morton. Only one producer this time. Again. Released 5 days after Valentine's Day on February 19th, which is tomorrow. At the Metropolis Museum, a local Egyptologist, Dr. Jordan, is found murdered by his assistant, Ms. Jane Hogan, in front of the sarcophagus of King Tush. Not Tut, mind you, Tush. She finds a syringe near the doctor's body. With no other evidence to go on, the police assume that Miss Hogan is the killer. She admits that her fingerprints are on the syringe and she is convicted for the murder. A few days later, Clark Kent gets a call from a professor at the museum asking him to come to the museum and listen to another theory on the death of Dr. Jordan. Clark sneaks out, claiming it is his doctor, but out of curiosity, Lois follows. At the museum, the professor explains to Clark how he believes that Dr. Jordan was actually killed by a mummy's curse. He takes Clark through the Egypt exhibit at the museum and tells him the story of King Tush, again, which is similar to the story of King Tut. Lois follows them, making sure not to be seen. Before his death, the 12-year-old Tush's father, the old pharaoh who ruled the north and warred against the south, commanded his giant superhuman guards to swear an oath to protect his son throughout eternity. After his death, Tush became the pharaoh. Shortly after that, King Tush became ill, already being young and sickly, and eventually died. Keeping their promise to the old pharaoh, the guards committed suicide by drinking poison in order to protect King Tush in the afterlife. The professor then shows Clark the catacombs which Dr. Jordan recreated in the image of how it looked inside the pyramids. He then reveals that Dr. Jordan had recreated an ancient formula called the fluid of life, which he injected into the giant guards' mummified bodies, hoping they would return to life, but seemingly failed. As they approach King Tush's sarcophagus, the professor explains that Dr. Jordan invoked the curse by trying to open the king's sarcophagus. Clark pushes a button on the side of the sarcophagus and just misses being pricked by a poisoned syringe that shoots out at him. This new evidence seems enough to clear Miss Hogan of the murder charges. Sensing that the needle missed, the sarcophagus opens and a light from the dead king's jeweled amulet awakens his giant guards. The guards attack Clark, Lois, and the professor. Clark is thrown into a sarcophagus where he quickly changes into Superman. As Superman, he defeats the giant guards and saves Lois and the professor from a grim demise by fire. Back at the Daily Planet, Clark smiles as he finishes his report on Miss Hogan being released from jail. Lois is sitting on the desk. She was injured in the mummy attacks and her hands had to be bandaged up, therefore she wasn't able to write the story herself. She grumbles as Clark finishes his story. When Clark asks how she knew to be there, she replies, "My mummy done told me."
Which was a cute line.
Yep.
This is one of the better Famous Studios episodes. For the first time in the series, Lois finally gets injured. About damn time. Yay!
Yep.
You can tell I'm not a Lois Lane fan, right?
Yeah.
I just, mostly because there's so many other episodes here throughout the series where she gets in even worse scenarios where she's like buried underneath rubble and Clark comes and pulls everything off and she's nothing, not even torn clothing, no scratches, no nothing. She finally got what was coming to her. And I'm like, yay.
And Clark finally got a story.
Yes. But, but this is kind of true of all the Lois Lanes. I mean, the Lois Lane of the George Rivera was kind of that busybody, but always she'd get captured, but never get really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I never liked, even Margot Kidder's Lois in the Chris Reeve Superman films wasn't that great. I never really liked Lois until the Erica Durance version from Smallville, because she was actually realistic, and they gave her enough reason to have the spunk that she had, but when she got in trouble, she knew she was in trouble. And she would at least be trying smart enough to not get in too much trouble if she could help it. But I don't know. Anyway, what did you think of this episode?
I liked it. I think it's one of the better animated of these 9 episodes. I thought, like, especially the sequence where after Clark pushes the button and
the needle comes out.
Yes, and the guard mummies come to life. I thought that was well done.
Yes, in fact, that whole scene probably inspired Mum-Ra's tune from Thundercats.
I could see that.
With the 4 guardian spirits of evil type thing. And it's like, interesting, And like you say, King Tush, it's like, yes, he had a big ass. But oh well. Anyway, our next episode is Jungle Drums, and is directed by Dan Gordon, story by Jay Morton and Robert Little, produced by Sam Buchwald, with the same voice cast, same production and distributor, released March 26, 1943, with a running time of 8 minutes. This is another one of those World War II type stories, unfortunately. Deep in the African jungle, a tribe of Aboriginal warriors are having a celebration. Their leader is a tall man in a white cloak, kind of like a Ku Klux Klan member, and secretly he's a Nazi commander, and the tribe's sacred temple is actually an underground Nazi outpost. The Nazis are eagerly awaiting the arrival of an American convoy who has information about an Allied attack. When a military plane flies overhead, they shoot it down. The commander sends the warriors to search for survivors. At the wreck site, the mortally wounded lieutenant hands his secret documents to the crew's only survivor, Lois. Why is Lois laying on a freaking Allied plane in the middle of the jungle? How did this happen? But anyway, he tells her to destroy the documents, and then he dies. You'd think with the plane crash there'd be fire nearby. She could just throw the documents into the fire, but no. She's like completely flabbergasted, doesn't know what to do. Lois gets caught by the natives and she gets tied up, but she frees herself and runs into the jungle and avoids capture long enough to hide the documents. Where does she hide them? Under a rock. She's then captured again and brought back to the temple for interrogation, where she is tied to a chair. When she refuses to talk, the commander orders the jungle warriors to burn her at the stake. Meanwhile, Clark Kent and another pilot are flying out in another plane to meet with Lois's convoy. They spot the wrecked plane not far from the village of the Aboriginal tribe, and for whatever reason, it's like the pilot doesn't even notice this is going on, but he opens the window and Clark jumps out with a parachute and jumps down to investigate. Which, if the story was being written properly, the pilot would be going, "Wait, what are you doing? You're not a soldier. What are you doing?" But anyway, once on the ground, of course, he changes into Superman. He flies to the village, where Lois is already being burned at the stake with the commander watching her. But she's not burning at the stake. I mean, she's in the middle of the fire. She's bound to the stake, but she's not actually burning because she's Lois Lane, I guess, right? Just then one of the warriors approaches the commander and gives him a set of papers. Of course, it's the documents that Lois hid in the woods. Overjoyed with the success, the commander then has his men radio Nazi headquarters and send the Nazi U-boats to attack the Allied fleet. Superman arrives and saves Lois from burning to death, though, of course, like I said, she's not even really injured. This is one of the things that really bothers me about the cartoon. But anyway, when the warriors see a man who can walk through fire, they run in terror. The Nazi soldiers futilely fight back against Superman, of course. Meanwhile, Lois takes a spare white cloak and sneaks into the office to use the radio. The commander catches her, but before he can do anything to stop her, Superman comes to her rescue. She sends a message to the Allied parties at Allied headquarters, warning them about the Nazi subs about to attack the Allied fleet. Out at sea, the Nazi subs prepared to decimate the Allied fleet, but before they can attack, they are bombed by a squadron of Allied B-26 bombers that were sent in response to Lois's warnings. What does that sound?
It's my office phone.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
No problem. I just want to make sure it wasn't something going on. Anyway, the subs get destroyed and the Allied fleet is saved. Meanwhile, in Berlin, during a thunderstorm, they cut to Adolf Hitler, who's listening to a news flash about the defeat of his U-boat force. Angered, he flips a switch on the radio, turns his back to the camera, and hangs his head in frustration as the tune "Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition" is heard. Sadly, every time these guys do anything remotely related to World War II, it comes across so poorly. The story could have simply been Clark and Lois go to Africa, her plane goes down, and the Aboriginals are just simply cannibals, and Superman rescuing her from them would have been sufficient as a story, and probably would have been a lot better. But then it would have been racist.
It would have been a lot better.
But yeah, but the funny part is the next episode. And next episode, that's kind of what they do in a way. What is the next episode? The Underground World.
The Underground World, directed by Seymour Nightel, story by Jay Morton, June 18th, 1943. So, a local scientist, Dr. Henderson, comes to the Daily Planet with a proposition for Perry White. Several decades earlier, Dr. Henderson's father discovered a series of caverns that he named the Henderson Caves. But the elder Henderson never returned from the caves. Now the younger Dr. Henderson would like to go back into the caverns. He would like the Daily Planet to fund the expedition, and he would like Clark Kent and Lois Lane to come along and report on everything they find. Mr. White agrees. Several days later, Clark, Lois, and Dr. Henderson are at the entrance to the Henderson Caves, ready to go spelunking. The caverns are part of a river system, so the only way into the caverns is by boat. Lois and Dr. Henderson take the first boat, and Clark follows later. Inside the cave, Lois and Dr. Henderson row into a large grotto. They dock on the side of the river, but once they step out, the boat drifts off down the river. A sack of dynamite in the boat is actually accidentally ignited and causes an explosion that Clark, who is just entering the caverns, can hear outside. Sensing danger, Clark paddles into the caves trying to find his colleagues. Meanwhile, the explosion has garnered the attention of an ancient race of hawkmen living in the caverns. The explosion blasted open a hole in their cave, giving them a passage to the surface. Dr. Henderson and Lois are captured and brought before the chief hawkman. They see a statue of Dr. Henderson's father above the chief's throne. Neither of them understands why the hawkmen have a statue like that or where they got it. The chief signals to the others, and Lois and Dr. Henderson are tied to a stone slab. As Clark enters the cave, he sees Lois and Dr. Henderson being lowered into a giant pot of a bubbling gold-colored liquid. Seeing the liquid, Lois looks back at the statue of the elder Dr. Henderson and suddenly realizes where it came from. The hawkmen had fatally coated him in gold metal. Now that they're about to do the same thing to Lois and the younger Dr. Henderson, Clark quickly changes into Superman, but before he can save Lois and Dr. Henderson, He must first fight his way through an army of Hawkmen. Once he's finished with the Hawkmen, he rescues them and wastes no time getting them out of the cave. The Hawkmen chase after them, but Superman uses more dynamite to cover the entrance to their cave with rubble. Back at the Daily Planet, Mr. White is impressed by Clark and Lois's findings, but he feels no one would believe the story, so he burns the report and the photographs taken in the caverns. And so, yes, this story does prove that the cannibalistic aboriginals would have worked in the last episode and would have worked effectively. They're too similar in tone, but this is the better, scarier story because there's no Nazi nonsense. And the Hawkmen are pretty well animated, I think.
Yes. That's pretty much all there is to say about that one. So we'll just move on to the second one. The last episode of the series, Secret Agent, directed by Seymour Nightel, story by Carl Meyer. This one has another 4 producers for some reason. And again, this is another one of those stories where it is a World War II patriotic nonsense story. It was released on July 30th of 43 with a runtime of 8 minutes. Clark Kent is driving in town and he stops at a drugstore to talk to Perry White about his assignment. Outside, there's a car chase of one car trying to gun down another car. The gunman's car crashes into the drugstore through the window, and they get out and steal Clark's car. Clark dashes out of the drugstore trying to catch up to the gangsters. He grabs onto the rear of his car, which you would think it's Superman. He grips the car and he tears the whole back end off, but no, for some reason he just grabs the bumper and holds on to the end. The 2 cars pass by a police car, who then try to chase them down. The gangsters try to shoot the police, but Clark grabs the gangster's gun and throws it away. The gangsters then use another gun to blow out the victim, the person they're chasing, the car's tires on that car. The gangsters speed off with Clark on their rear bumper. The agent steps out of her damaged car and tells the policeman that she needs to see the police chief. They take her to the police headquarters, where she explains to him that she needs to get these records she's stolen to Washington, D.C., because her records on the gang who were just trying to get to gun her down. For 6 months, she's tricked them into thinking that she was part of their gang, while she got the records of the members' names and their plans that she's going to turn over to the government, because they're basically homegrown terrorists on the Nazi side. Meanwhile, Clark is, so to speak, captured by the goons, and he learns that these gangsters are trying to get the records back from the agent, and that they have made a plan to basically catch her at the bridge to the airport. So the agent gets a police escort towards the airport, but it's attacked by the gangsters. During the gunfight, the policeman that was driving for the agent steps out of his car to shoot back at the gangsters and gets shot, if I remember correctly. It has been a week or so since we watched it. But anyway, the agent takes over the car and starts driving through the fighting to get to the airport. Another group of the saboteurs from the gangsters positioned at the bridge to get the controls of the bridge. And they turn the bridge to block the agent. So that, they turn it so that it's not lined up with the road. But she keeps on driving until she sees that the road isn't connected to the bridge. She jumps out of the car. The car drives off the edge and crashes into an electrical tower. She tries then to reverse the bridge by getting to the bridge control so that she can at least get across the cavern and get to the airport by foot. But she is nearly shot by one of the gangsters. She does manage to reverse the bridge's turning to get it back going across the way, but then the electric tower begins to fall and it smashes into the bridge control room, which sends her reeling out of the building and onto the bridge's turning mechanism, and she is knocked out, while the massive gear turning in the turning mechanism slowly starts moving towards her unconscious body, where she will get crushed. The gangster on the bridge telephones his superior and tells him that the agent is trapped on the bridge and that he's about to be overrun by cops, but is cut off as the police open fire upon him. The gangster's boss locks Clark in another room and leaves with his henchman to go get the agent's records, which, if she's got there and she's trapped there and she's going to get squashed, there's not going to be records to be found because they'll be destroyed as well, but whatever. Of course, now that Clark doesn't have anybody to see him, he breaks his bindings, changes into Superman, and then he jumps onto the cable of the elevator where the gangsters were taking, and he pulls their elevator up and ties off the elevator cable with the gangsters above the top floor, and they're stuck inside the elevator, so they can't get to the agent. He then flies out to the bridge, and he rescues the agent before she gets crushed. Again, just convenience. Then he picks her up and flies with her from wherever they're at in Metropolis all the way to Washington, D.C., where he drops her off and then flies away with a salute to the American flag. It is the best episode involving anything to do with spies or World War II, but unfortunately they never explain what the records were, who the gangsters were, who they were in league with, nothing. It's just very blah. I do believe the repeated oddity of bad stories involving Superman and World War II hurt the production in the second half of this series. Again, I said I'm sure they were dictated. I made sure I went and looked, and yes, they were dictated by request. They were dictated to, but we'll call it requested. But one of the big problems about having superheroes fight the Nazis in that era is, well, real-life heroes are sacrificing themselves to win the actual war, and the fictional heroes' characters do so with such relative ease that it makes it really kind of disrespectful and iffy and thought process in retrospect. And I think this is true really of any of the time we do war. And I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't have a whole lot of superhero war comics when we had the Gulf War or any of the Middle East crisis that we had in the 90s and 2000s, was because it just isn't realistic.
Yep.
Overall, the grades for the episodes for Famous Studios are significantly lower than the earlier episodes done by Fleischer Studios for these reasons. But the overall body of work, what would you give the overall body of work?
A 3.5.
Okay, that's what I did too. We both gave them a 3.5 out of 5.
Mm.
I think that's a reasonable thing. I mean, these are 80-year-old films. So, time isn't always going to be generous to them regardless of what was going on in the 40s. But there's a lot of quality animation that did influence all of animation, but later on, like Bruce Timm with the Batman animated series, a lot of that stuff with the Art Deco and the dark tones and everything was picked up off of this series. So it does hold a worthy place of respect and admiration in the history of the character of Superman and the DC. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
That's pretty much it. It was, it's definitely influential. I did do some research because I was curious to know exactly what happened with the Fleischers and why it became Famous Studios.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk a little bit about that if you want.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, so if you go back to around 1936, the Fleischer Studios, and again headed by Max Fleischer and Dave Fleischer, Around 1936, that was they were pretty much at their peak. They had like 4 series, including the Betty Boop and Popeye cartoons. And Popeye was very, very successful. And as we all know in Hollywood, when something's very, very successful, then the studios want more of it. Now, the problem was um, the Fleischer studio wasn't that big. So when the studio demanded more product, that means that the studio had to grow. And they grew rather quickly, maybe a little too quickly, which and at the time they were located in New York. So with all this extra labor, then they had crowded working conditions, um, sped up production deadlines, drawing quotas, and internal management issues, all of which resulted in a strike that began in May of 1937 and lasted for 5 months. Um, and it was so bitter that the picketers actually managed to get the Fleischer cartoons banned from about 500 movie houses. So, um, so there was that, and then also in 1937, that was the year that Walt Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was the first full-length animated feature, and of course, it did phenomenally well. So of course, Paramount comes to the Fleischer brothers and said, hey, we want our own animated feature.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be Gulliver's Travels.
Right.
And it was made in about less than half the time that Snow White was made in. Like, think Walt spent like 4 years on Snow White. The Fleischers did Gulliver's Travels in less than a year and a half. Also, the studio, they were going to relocate the studio from New York to Miami, Florida.
So there's a lot of overhead expenditures that put them into bankruptcy, more or less, which is what led them to the merger, more or less.
Yeah, they wanted Miami, of course, offered tax breaks, which so basically, so all of this happening at the same time really started to put a strain on the relationship between Max and Dave. And then come to find out that Dave was having a very public and very adulterous affair with his secretary. And basically the relationship between the Fleischer brothers just ceased to exist anymore. And they weren't talking to each other. They were communicating by memo, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that, plus Gulliver's Travels did okay business, but not great business, and basically in any of their cartoons that weren't Popeye cartoons did not do good business at all. And then while they were working on the Superman stuff, they were developing another feature film, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, that flopped. And after that, that was just the last straw.
Okay.
So,
well, like I said, mostly what it was is they just had too much overhead and couldn't do everything that they were trying to do at the time.
Yep.
And, and of course, like you say, they did have the personal issues between them because of David's extramarital affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of things there, but
another thing that I don't think helped is when they were being told what to do, like the propaganda cartoons, they clearly were not at their best when they were being dictated.
Well, that's just it. I think that when they finished halfway through, they started coming up with these things, and I think that was what killed it. Ultimately, I think that the brothers, with the other stuff that was going on, they're like, "Now you're telling us how to do what we're supposed to do. Screw it. We're not going to bother." And that left the rest of the studio guys, like Buchwald and I can't think of his name. 1 second. Seymour Neidl and Izzy Sparber ended up having to take a lot of the brunt and ended up taking over what Fleischer's did as well. And I think that they were just overworked because these guys were writing the stories, they were producing, they were directing, taking turns all the way through. Whereas the Fleischers handled most of the production before. And usually, it was a lot more smoother operation. Whereas with these later stories, a lot of people putting their hands into it, and I think that's why you had all the multiple producers on episodes. But anyway, that's pretty much it then for tonight. Next week, we will be back with a return to the horror genre and a look at Guillermo del Toro's 2015 film Crimson Peak, which is one of John's favorites, I do believe. Starring Tom Hiddleston, Jessica Chastain, and Mia Wasikowska. Did I pronounce that correctly?
I think so.
So that's what we'll be discussing next week at our normal time of 8 p.m. In the meantime, we want to say, as always, thank you for watching. And you can reach John at grayfigaro@hotmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to reach me, well, first, if you like this video, or you think others might, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to continue to get content from this channel. As always, I thank you for your support. Now, if you do want to reach out to me, I'm on Facebook at Lewis.BrightRaven, at Twitter at LewisBrightRave2. You can see some of my artwork at DeviantArt.com/BrightRaven. You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis Brightraven, exclusively on YouTube. You want to email me with thoughts, questions, you want to commission some artwork, Quoth the Raven, LBR72@gmail.com is the address. If I don't get back to you within a day or two, try LewisBrightRaven@yahoo.com. That is all for now. We will see you next time. Have a great weekend. Oh, wait a minute. I take it back. We do have one more thing I got to mention. That's tomorrow. I will be back on, let me say here, if I can find it. I don't know why it didn't show the first time, but I'll find it. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., I will be back with a crowdfunding review edition where we review the Baboon, Skull of a King one-shot, Bigfoot Knows Karate #1, Room Space one-shot, and Heavy one-shot. These are all crowdfunded books that I've gotten in the last 2 months, and I hadn't gotten around to reading them. I'm way behind on my reading, folks, but tomorrow at 5 p.m., we'll be reviewing these 4 books.
Cool.
And that does close it out for today. So we will see you next time. Whoops. It doesn't want to go where it's supposed to. So have a good one.